And there we go. I believe everyone is in. Let everybody here get settled for just a moment. I might go ahead and mute some folks.
No.
Awesome. Well, I suppose without further ado, we may as well get rolling here with the fifth annual Nickolay Dodov Foundation Roundtable Avalanche event. Welcome everybody. It looks like people are going to continue to filter in here. But we'll get things started here. I suppose I am serving as the moderator for you this evening. For those of you I have not yet had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Casey Glaubman, and I'm the Executive Director and Education Coordinator for the Friends of the Mount Shasta Avalanche Center up here in beautiful, usually sunny Mount Shasta, California. And joined around this digital table this evening by McKinley Talty from the Utah Avalanche Center. McKinley grew up riding in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York. In 2013, having mastered riding on ice, decided to challenge himself with the greatest snow on earth and made his way out to Utah. His love of backcountry riding brought him to the snow science program at Montana State University. And McKinley then began working at the Utah Avalanche Center in 2020. When not on his board, you'll find him biking, fishing, or exploring new areas to check out when the snow starts falling. McKinley?
It's great to meet everyone. Thanks for being here.
Awesome. And we've got with us once again Dallas Glass. Dallas is currently the assistant director at the Northwest Avalanche Center and has held several roles there since being hired in 2013. Dallas's early education includes a BS in Forest Resource Management from Clemson University and an MS in Hydrology from the University of Nevada. Before his time at the NWAC, Dallas got his start in the Avalanche world and continues as a training coordinator for the AAA, an instructor trainer for ARI, and an avalanche forecaster at the Mount Rose ski area. Welcome back, Dallas.
Thanks. Great to see you all. Thanks for having me.
Next, we've got Karl Birkeland. Karl is currently a senior avalanche scientist at the National Avalanche Center. He grew up skiing in Colorado and, between then and now, has held just about every avalanche-related job there is, including professional ski patroller, backcountry forecaster, and of course, avalanche researcher. Karl is an avalanche scientist and assistant professor with the Department of Earth Sciences at Montana State University. And if you've done any reading about avalanches, it's very likely you've read one of his many, many published works on the subject.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and it's great to be here for the Nick Dodov Foundation.
Indeed. Next, we've got Nick Meyers. Nick is the director of the Mount Shasta Avalanche Center here and lead climbing ranger on Mount Shasta during the summers. He's been working with, let's see here. He's been working with the Avalanche Center since its inception for over 20 years. Nick went to school in Gunnison, Colorado, but spent much of that time at nearby Crested Butte. After graduating, he decided he might as well find a way to get paid continuing to play in the snow. These days, you're just as likely to find him pow surfing with Powder Dog Benny in tow. Okay.
Hey, gang, good evening. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here, and look forward to chatting with y'all.
All right. Next, we've got David Reichel. David went to school at UC Berkeley, and as soon as possible after that, hightailed it for the mountains. He took his first avalanche course out in the Rockies and has been exploring any snow-covered peak possible since then. He made his way back home to the Sierra and has since taught about, in his own words, a bazillion ARI courses and has spent his time splitboarding all over Tahoe. He guides and instructs avalanche courses in Mount Shasta and Argentina. Been meaning to talk to you about that. Why are we not doing this live in Argentina? But we'll get back to that. And in 2014, he founded the California Avalanche Workshop. His professional experience includes starting a charter school for at-risk young adults, running an outdoor program, directing a small nonprofit, and working to get more kids on bikes. David,
Hi, everybody. Yeah, good to be here. Thanks, Casey. It's honored to be a part of this group.
Absolutely. And last but certainly not least, the reason why we're all here today, Natalia and Alex Dodov, they were both born and raised in Sofia, Bulgaria, and years ago found their way to Bear Valley in the Sierra Nevada, where they've called home ever since. A little over 10 years ago, they experienced a tragedy that unfortunately has befallen many people in our community, the loss of their son, Nickolay, in an avalanche accident. Knowing that their son would want them to continue to share the joy of the mountains with others, they have made it their life's work to teach avalanche education to as many people as possible. Through their foundation, the Nickolay Dodov Foundation, they have taught avalanche education to thousands and thousands of people, often school groups and young riders as they prepare to venture into the backcountry for the first time. It's safe to say that these two have helped as many people learn avalanche safety as any other people alive. We're all very lucky to be able to work with them and to just have them as a part of this community that we all love. So, from all of us, thank you guys so much for having us here and doing the work that you do.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you so
Hi,
much.
everybody.
Thank you so much. We are thankful from the deep of our hearts, and this is what keeps us going, and to be a small part of big meaningful message. And we still go to the backcountry every day, and we still reach out to many kids. This winter, this is our 11th event, and we have been going in person to many kids from 7 to 17 and more, and it's very meaningful to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Very
guys.
thank you.
Thank you guys. Now, we do have some topics to jump into here, and I know that some of the folks here have some prepared materials that we'll certainly get to. Do want to say, though, if you have questions while we're going, like, please toss it in the chat. We'd love to answer as many questions as people have. It's a great opportunity. You've got a lot of assembled knowledge on this virtual stage, so take advantage of it. Ask your questions. If there's not anything to start with, I suppose we could jump into some of the prepared stuff or the topics that we had discussed. If anybody would like to get us started.
I can start.
All right, perfect. Karl, take it away.
So, one of the topics that Alex wanted to talk about tonight was stability tests. And so, Alex, maybe you should just tell us sort of what you have in your mind about what would be the sort of interesting questions that we'd want to ask ourselves about stability tests.
I mean, my question is like, I have seen a lot of people going to the backcountry, and some of them they wanted to check the snow and dig a snow pit to find out what the snow is like. Most of them, they're so in a hurry, so excited to hit the slopes and without even checking the snow. So my question is like, does it really work to perform a snow pit and find out what the snow is like, or you just rely on the weather forecast that you read this in the morning before you went to the backcountry? And if you're even been taking classes and you're familiar with the snow and you know how to do it, does it really make the difference if you do it as often as possible on different slope sites and different slope angles, different slope exposure from north to south and around? And another thing is like when you find out how scary it is, what people should do.
Yeah, no, those are all really good questions. I mean, a lot of whether or not people should use stability tests to me anyway, um, it comes down to whether or not you want to travel in avalanche terrain. And so if you want to avoid avalanches, then the best thing to do is you just learn how to measure slope angles, make sure you know how to recognize avalanche terrain, and then you just absolutely avoid avalanche terrain. Now, if you decide, like most of us do, that you want to go into avalanche terrain, you want to ski or snowmobile or snowboard down slopes steeper than 30 degrees or pass under that kind of terrain, then you're going to need to know something about avalanches. And, we get these great avalanche forecasts from, some of these other folks on the panel who put out daily avalanche forecasts. And those are really, really important. But what everyone has to remember is that when they put out an avalanche forecast, it's for a broad area, right? And conditions can vary a lot over these broad areas. And so really, if we want to know whether or not a specific slope is going to be stable, we have kind of a limited number of tools. The ideal tool to use would be explosives. But of course, not all of us, if you're not on a ski patrol, you're not running around with a bunch of explosives in your backpack. Or if you are, you could find yourself in trouble with the ATF. But what we do have are these different stability tests. And yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people that say, well, they take too long. But if you do them often enough and get used to doing them, you can typically do a stability test in under 5 minutes. And that holds a couple of different advantages. And maybe before I show any, I can show a couple of pictures of some stability tests, but before I do that, let me just open it up to the other panelists or to our audience and see if other folks have things that they'd like to say about it first. And it's okay if you're going to be shy.
Karl, I'll ask you a question about it. I mean,
Sure.
the last couple ISSWs, I think there's been some interesting research about craftsmanship, and you do your column, and your column is supposed to look like this, but it kind of looks like this, and all those sort of things I'm sure you're aware of. And then the tapometer is kind of a cool, fun thing. Just sort of trying to quantify how, despite our best efforts, my tests are not exactly the same as Casey's or whatever. Just curious your thoughts on that sort of general area of scholarship.
Yeah, so I think in general, when you do a stability test, you want to do it the same way every time. And you do want to make it as clean as you possibly can because there's already so much variability. There's so much natural variability that you want to try and minimize the variability. It's almost like this idea of garbage in, garbage out, right? If every time you do it different, then it's going to be hard to interpret your results. And then, the other thing is just that you can get a lot of different results with a stability test, but the key is really testing a specific weak layer and a specific slab to see if you can initiate a crack and to see if that crack will propagate. And so I'll just throw up a few slides here. Let's make sure I can. Oh, it says that sharing is not turned on. I'll send my request to Casey.
You should be able to share now, Karl. Also, while we're getting this going, there was a really good question asked in the chat that actually I've heard similar things like this throughout over the years, and I was wondering how others felt. Just as stability tests overall, are they more of an instability test? Being able to rule out stability versus being able to rule in stability, that kind of thing. And the use of them like that.
Yeah. I think, that is somewhat a misnomer calling it a stability test because what we're really using the test for is we're searching for instability. So you're exactly right, Casey.
Let's give credit where credit is due. This was actually our friend Nathan in the chat. I don't want to
okay,
take credit for Nathan there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stability tests are really instability tests. That's what we think of when we think of a stability test as an instability test. And so what you're doing is you're searching for instability, okay? And the key to not misusing a stability test is you only use a stability test to tell you that it's unstable. You don't use a stability test or an instability test to tell you that it's stable. So you're searching for instability, okay? So the way you use this in your decision making, like people get confused because they think that, oh, if I dug one, maybe I'd get a stable result and then I'd ski it when I shouldn't have skied it before. Well, then you're using that instability test incorrectly. The way to use it is you get together all your information, the information about the snowpack, things your friends have told you, things that are in the avalanche advisory. You've been following the avalanche advisory for the last couple of weeks. You've seen where the weak layers are, where the avalanches are, et cetera, and you're feeling pretty good. So you go out and as you go along, you make observations. Do you see wind loading on a slope? Do you feel any collapsing or womping? Do you get any cracks shooting out from your skis or snowboard or snowmobile? And you don't get those, and you get up to the top and you're thinking, yeah, I'm going to go ski that slope. That's when you do a stability test. And if you get an unstable result, that is going to make you think pretty hard about whether or not you should go down that slope. If you get a stable result and you go ahead and get on that slope, you were planning on getting on that slope anyway, you know? So the only piece of information that you're missing, if you decide to get on the slope without digging, you don't really know what's under your feet. And it's the same as if you decide you might really hate looking to the right. And so when you cross a street, you only look to the left. You never look to the right. And that might work well for almost your entire life. But then one day you're not going to look right and a car's going to hit you, you know? And so this is just like collecting one more piece of information that might give you a better idea what's going on. So, and the more you do it, the better you get at it, the easier it is to interpret. And and also the faster you do them. So I'll just say a couple of words. I guess you should be able to see my screen now, hopefully. Yeah. So if you do a stability test, use a modern test. That would be an extended column test or a propagation saw test. And you know, ideally, like your best test is using explosives, but we all know that's not feasible. So let's just look at an extended column test. You're isolating a block that's about 90 centimeters wide. This one's a little wider than that, a little over 100 centimeters by 30 centimeters upslope. You're isolating all the corners, and then you're tapping on one side. It's 10 taps from your wrist, 10 taps from your elbow, and then 10 taps from your shoulder, and you're trying to see if you're going to get propagation. So here we go. We're doing our 10 taps from our wrist, 10 taps from our elbow. Suddenly I lost count. And so there you go. That was on a surface ore layer that we had. And you know, you can mess around with larger ones. We've done research. These are little plastic dots that you put in the side, and we're doing a little tapping here and just a slight tap, and we could analyze how these cracks are propagating across these blocks. And I have to put this one in because I just got this last week from some colleagues in Norway, and maybe some of you have seen this thing floating around. But here's what they did in Norway. They haven't had much snow this year. They got a little bit of snow, then they got a lot of wind, and they must have had a lot of extra time because this is a extended column test that's almost 15 meters long, or no, I think they said 12 meters long. And watch, this person down here is going to be tapping very lightly on this test.
That's awesome. Oh, wow.
if you get a test result like that, that's going to be pretty good information, huh? So, any of those test results are ones that would make me, if you get a test result, if you get a propagating extended column test, and no matter how hard you hit, you have to work through the process in your mind of why you think you have so much additional other information that's telling you that it's stable, that it's okay to go out on that slope. So I'll show two more quick videos. This first one is a propagation saw test. This one we shot with a high-speed camera in Switzerland. The video is shot at 3,000 frames per second. The saw is over here with this little dot, and you'll see that I barely touched the surface hoar layer, and then you'll be able to watch it propagate across in ultra slow motion. So I touch it, and boom. And you can see how what happens when you get crack propagation in avalanche, you get a little bit of a collapse and then a wave forms, and that wave just pushes that crack forward. And of course, the Swiss, not to be outdone by the Norwegians, here's a nice long propagation saw test. This is 10 meters long, and I'll fast forward here till they're about to do the measurement. There's where the saw is, using a high-speed camera again, there in the middle, and boom, all the way across with a layer of surface hoar. So, and I'll bring up just one last point for people to think about with stability tests, and then I'll stop sharing my screen so we can see each other better. But the point is just that when we talk about making good decisions, one of the things that the behavioral psychiatrists or psychologists tell us is that, and the behavioral economists tell us, is that we need to slow down our thinking. If our thinking's going super fast, then we're thinking powder, 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 boom. And just like Alex was talking about, my friends get too excited about skiing and then they just go. And what you really need to do is slow yourself down. And one of the best ways to slow yourself down is somewhere on your tour, you stop, you get your entire group together, you dig a hole, and you do a stability test. And for at least 5 minutes, all everyone really thinks about is the snow. And you're stopped so you can have an open communication about what you're thinking about doing. And so even if you don't get dramatic results that change your mind, at least you've stopped and thought and talked and communicated. So that's my last little blurb about. I'm kind of the stability test cheerleader, but I think for good reason.
I like that a lot, and I think there's a lot of interesting information there, and of course, the Swiss and Norwegians doing it right out there. But one thing I think is really important, and I hear this a lot in chatting with folks out in the community, is like, oh, I don't want to take all that time to dig these pits, but the way you're describing it too, as this sort of, it can be very quick, it doesn't, not doing it poorly, but it doesn't have to be this long drawn out process. Your day does not have to be spent digging pits exclusively. It can be done on the way to something else.
Literally, I mean, less than 5 minutes. I think if you're taking more than 5 minutes, unless you've got a really deep snowpack and you really, really think you need to test a layer down low, often you don't need to test layers much deeper than, 1.5 meters, deeper than about 4.5 feet. You usually don't have to test those unless there's another area where it's shallower, So, but as long as you don't have thick ice crusts, a really easy way to do this is just a knotted nylon cord, 2 probes. You measure 90 centimeters across, 30 centimeters uphill. You put both your probes in. You toss this knotted cord over the top, pull back and forth. And as long as you don't have super hard layers, you can cut a very nice column just like that. Tap, tap, tap. Test happens. You've stopped. You've talked a little bit. You've all looked at the test together. And, there's no need to pull out a magnifying glass or to even to, if you're just out there recreational skiing, it's not like you're trying to assess every little piece of the snow. You're just trying to get the baseline data. Do I have a slab? Is it sitting on a weak layer? And how easy is it to crack that weak layer? And once I crack it, does it propagate? Those are your key questions. And ultimately, how much force it takes is important, but probably not quite as important as whether or not it propagates, because if we know that it propagates, there might be other areas of the slope where it's not so hard, where it's much easier to initiate that crack. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Oh, Nathan asked, is the CT still worth performing? And, I think the CT, like you said, Nathan, you can identify a layer to keep track of with the CT. The thing about the CT is that we end up getting a lot of unstable results with the CT that in snowpacks that aren't necessarily unstable. That's not necessarily a bad thing because it just makes you be more conservative. But I think what happens when people rely too much on the compression test, they get frustrated because they go and they do a test and they get an unstable result, but they look at the slope and all these people are skiing it and they're thinking, well, what am I doing this test for? So, but to find specific layers, or even if you think that there's a problem with a layer and it's not coming out with your extended column test, then doing a CT is not a bad thing at all to just try and figure out where that layer is. Does that layer exist in your snow? Because you are still looking for that slab and that weak layer. And maybe the ECT is just being a little stubborn and you're not quite getting that weak layer. The CT might get it for you so that you could identify it more easily.
I'll just add on here, guys. For us out here in California, our stability or our snowpack, our avalanche danger is often immediately during or just after storms. We don't often see lasting, persistent weak layers where digging can be really important to identify the layer and ascertain how sensitive it may be. A lot of our issues are, as mentioned, right during or just after storms. So one of my absolutely favorite things to do is just find the good old small test slope. And I'll go out of my way to find a small, steep slope of non-consequence, crucial piece of info there of non-consequence. So if something happens, you're not going to go with it and just stomp around and you'll see the shooting cracks. You might get some wumping. You might trigger a small little slide, but those are outstanding, canaries in the coal mine, bullseye information that the snow is unstable and that, I just triggered this small little thing. Larger ones could be possible.
I was going to say that's absolutely true. In your snow climate, I'm used to being in Montana and stuff, and we deal with a lot of persistent weak layers. So you're out on a sunny day 2 or 3 days after a storm, and you're still concerned. And occasionally you guys are getting some of these strange winters where you have a few lurking, persistent weak layers, but in a typical Sierra winter, probably not so much, huh?
Yeah, not so much. Although this winter we had a 28-day dry spell. And on some of our northerly, cold, sheltered slopes, we had a big old fat layer of sugary snow form on the top of the snowpack. And then we got 3 to 4 feet. And we had some massive wumping taking place out there when we were out walking around, snowmobiling around. And then we had a couple avalanches that occurred several days, almost a week after the storm on that layer. So that was exciting for us. We don't see that too often. We had the persistent weak layer problem up, which is also unique for our area. And then just recently, we had about 5 days of really cold, clear nights, bunch of surface hoar forming on ridges, which is also unique to our area. Oftentimes, a good old California sun or wind will destroy surface hoar before it gets buried. But we had some cold, clear nights with very little wind, cold days, and then it just got buried by a foot or two. So tomorrow could be a little touchy.
Nick, I like that you brought all that up. We're in the same boat up here right now. And I was actually out with one of our other forecasters, one of our newer forecasters the other day. And we got into snow profile. We actually did an ECT that Karl just showed, and our weak snowpack that we know is weak didn't fail. And so what we started talking about was like really what I'm always kind of going out there with, like when I think the snowpack is unstable, like I think that snowpack is guilty. And I am out there to interrogate that thing, and I'm going to ask it every question. And when it says, no, I'm not guilty, I'm like, you're guilty. And I'm going to ask it another question. I'm going to use a test slope, and I'm going to use a PST, and I'm going to use like, and turns out for us, the only question with this current snowpack that the snowpack will fess up to being guilty, to being unstable with, is a PST. The rest of our tests are not, they're being very inconsistent, but we're repeatedly getting shortcut links on these things. And we aren't seeing a ton of avalanches, but we are seeing avalanches. And it's been a really interesting, it was a fun conversation to have with them about like, I want to know as many different questions to ask that snowpack because if I think it's unstable, like I'm going to make it confess to telling me that it's unstable.
Yeah, just to jump in there, I mean, today in the Tahoe area, the Sierra Avalanche Center, we have high avalanche danger as our danger rating, and the second problem is persistent. And we've had persistent issue for the last week or so since really winter showed back up after Mother Nature took a dry January. And we have, things that were near surface facets formed during that dry period. They're now buried a couple feet deep before the storm that fell today. And we had a couple, giant, like 800-foot wide snowmobiler triggered avalanches and a snowboarder triggered avalanche, all near misses, no burials, no injuries, nothing. We were all very fortunate there. But now we have, who knows, like 3 feet of snow or something fell today and more coming tonight on top of that. So, yeah, and we have some buried surface hoar underneath the new snow that came in today. So really interesting observations coming in today, lots of activity. One of our professional field staff submitted a video of him being challenged just to isolate an ECT, right? He's getting ECT Vs because he was struggling just to isolate the ECT and the really weak storm snow. So yeah, interesting stuff going on out there.
Karl, I have a question for you. On your personal ski days, like if you're not going out for work, you're just going out to find some good snow. How often do you dig and perform these ECTs?
Yeah, it sort of depends on the day and just how stable stuff is. I usually try and dig at least once. But I have I have not dug and gotten burned. I have not if I feel like the snow is just super, super stable, like there was one time I got burned years ago where I had to go back to the old data, but I was out on a day with a friend, day off. We had the avalanche danger was low for the past 14 days, except that 8 days before that, it was moderate for one day with some wind. But it'd been low. There hadn't been a single avalanche in all of Southwest Montana. And we got to the top of a slope and I was just like, yeah, we're good, and I told my friend, hey, go ahead. And he took one turn across the top of it and he triggered an avalanche. It was a very small one. It was only like 8 inches deep, but it really took off in some surface facets and it just like plowed through all these trees and he was above the crown line. And he's like, well, why didn't we dig today? And I said, well, because it was low, except it wasn't low, I guess, you know? And so I generally try and dig somewhere. And if I don't dig, like when I go out with my daughters, they're always like, well, Dad, aren't we going to dig? And I'm like, yeah, we're going to dig. So, you know, but it all depends too. Like sometimes you know what you're looking for. You know, it's only a foot deep. You can do like 3 or 4 ECTs without even taking your skis off, you know?
It's a good lesson there in both the ease of performing them and also making sure you're traveling with good people that are holding you accountable as well. It's a good
That's
lesson there.
exactly right. Yeah.
Um, David, we've got a question in the chat specifically for you and your Tahoe area expertise. Thoughts on the basal facets on Porcupine Ridge out near Heavenly?
Yeah, so Heavenly, for those not familiar with the Sierra Avalanche Center forecast area, is a little bit on the eastern edge of our forecast area, kind of on the edge of what we call the Carson Range. And generally, there's a little bit less snow on the eastern portion of our forecast area. And sometimes we see like facet issues lasting a little longer. So, basal, I think isn't that basal like the yummy pizza topping, as Nathan wrote there? And I think, no, just picking on you, Nathan.
I
But
don't know
like,
what you guys got going on in Tahoe.
yeah, I don't know
Who
what those. I
knows?
don't know what. Sounds delicious, but I
Yeah.
think so. Basal, with an A, I guess, is at the bottom, right? So they're just facets of the ground. Um, and we had that. I mean, those are very common early season everywhere in the mountains that get snow. Um, in most of our forecast area, if you, at least in most of those pits I've dug, if you dig down and you find the basal facets, they're, were previously moist, wetted by some of our big rain events or something like that. But there are a few areas in the last week or plus where observers have dug down and found still dry, sugary, loose facets that didn't apparently get wet by some of the rain events. Porcupine Ridge near Heavenly is pretty high elevation. So it would be theoretically one of those zones. It's both shallow snowpack and high elevation. So, any rain that's happened in our area, when we've gotten a lot of rain, generally speaking, in our area, hasn't maybe been able to get to those facets. So, I mean, in theory, it totally makes sense. It is a concern. I think it's, I'm I'm getting a little in front of my skis, but I would expect it's isolated in our forecast area. It's not widespread, but I think Nathan, you're familiar with that Porcupine Ridge, Heavenly Zone, and it is like higher elevation, less snow. Some of these issues can last longer in that area, so it's consistent with what we see sometimes, and it's a little bit of a concern. Right now we're adding tons of new snow to the snowpack. There's all kinds of avalanche danger that we should be on heads up for. Over time, the feet and feet of new snow that we're adding will hopefully help some of those basal facets. But in the short term, like I wouldn't want to be below any big slope over in that zone. They concern me as well, Nathan. I agree.
One thing I'll just add is that, you've heard all of us tonight at one point or another say, wow, like we don't usually see this, but we're seeing this. And I think what we're seeing more and more is, and what we're likely to see in years ahead is that we may see stuff where if we've lived in Tahoe for the last 20 or 30 years, like we might see stuff that we haven't seen before. Like you might see worse facets. I know here we've had a lot of snow in Montana, and a lot of it came in really dense. And the ski area wasn't used to dealing with such dense snow coming in as fast as it did. We had one time where I can't remember how fast it was snowing, like 3 inches an hour, and it was like, over 10% density, which for us is dense. And they got some mid-storm weak layers there that we don't always get, and stuff got reactive really quickly, a lot faster than if you're just getting snow that's coming down that's super low density. Um, the physics are the same. They're not going to change. So if you have certain temperatures, if you have certain kinds of storm patterns, like we could get snow like California, or California could get snow like us, or snowpacks like us. And as we see more and more of these changes occurring in our climate and in our weather, yeah, you just have to be heads up for things that you might not be used to seeing.
I was just going to go back to stability tests again. I'm a big proponent for quality craftsmanship. You know, snow is a viscoelastic property. It's finicky as heck. And, you know, that it's just really important if you're going to do a stability test to just do it well and make sure those walls are clean and those cuts are nice and try to do it the same every time. I think it does make a difference. And then not to discount what I call the little secret squirrel test. So just as you're skinning along the skin track, take your hand and stick it in the snow and just feel down, punch down through the snow surface, feel the layers. You don't have to do a fancy, nice stability test all the time. You can just isolate a small block. You're just looking for a slab, a potential weak layer, any kind of information that you're putting in the brain bin and helping make your decision. Those little hand pit tests or hasty pits, some people call them, or whatever name you got for them, don't discount those too.
I got a question. I was just jealous when Karl was talking about just throwing the cord over the probes. For my fellow wet coast people, Dallas and Nick, how often does that work for you guys?
I don't even carry a cord.
Yeah, I haven't carried a cord in years. Sorry, Karl.
You guys need those, you know, they have those big snow saws that they make
Tindic
in Norway now.
saws.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
been a game changer. I
Yeah.
saw one in a social media post a few years ago at the Sawtooth, called up Scotty Savage and said, "What is it and where do I get one?" And
Yeah.
now our whole crew, I think, has them. And the big joke is that they should be giving us royalties because they're in so much of our media at the moment. We're
Yeah.
digging a lot right now because, like Tahoe, like Shasta, we've got PWLs, we've got persistent weak layers down there, and yeah, they aren't going away when it's been single digit temperatures in our mountains.
No.
So,
What saw, Dallas?
Tindic, Tinque.
No.
It's a very affordable Norwegian saw.
Very
It's not,
affordable.
it's not that affordable, but it's very nice. So I actually broke my pole just on maybe Monday trying to cut the back of a PST to get down to that buried persistent weak layer underneath the crust. And I spent some time on their website and I saw your testimonial on there, Dallas. I'm like, I know him. I know he likes that
I
saw.
actually did. I did get on there. I don't do this a ton, but I liked it so much. I wrote a review because I was like, it's that good of a piece of equipment. It's some like amazing engineering. Had, you know, like a lot of the folks on this call, I've had a lot of snow saws over the years, and some work really well, and some are st like in pristine condition in a Rubbermaid bin behind me. So this is one that as soon as I used it, I was like, this thing's they did a good job. So.
Yeah,
Yeah, it does. It makes whipping out one of these things really fast. Like Karl said, 5 minutes and I've got a PST done, and that's just a game changer. So
yeah. Yeah, I was over teaching a stability test workshop in Norway last spring. And so I met the guy who designed that, and he's a mountain guide. And he's got a client who is really into aerospace materials. And the guy just said, "Hey, like I do all this, I build all these crazy things with these aerospace materials. Like what do you need?" And he's like, "You know, in Norway, the snow's super dense, they get rain, they get super cold weather, lots of crust, lots of wind slabs." And they're like, "I want a good snow saw." So they worked on it for like 3 years just to build this thing. And so, yeah, I give it 2 thumbs up too, even if Dallas is the one on the website.
So Nathan just asked, you know, like, is the locking mechanism bomber? You know, I'm 3 years deep with my saw, and I haven't had a single issue, Nathan. And you're right, $200 does sound really steep, but when you think you pay like 100 for a 30 centimeter, like a 35 centimeter saw, this thing is a full meter plus. So, you know, like it's not that crazily different than the other saws that are out there. So. Um, but yeah, you know, if you're doing a lot of these, it definitely is worth your time. If you're not, you know, a cord, I did use a cord quite a bit for a long time, but I didn't get to use the little knotted cord. I actually had to do the wire one with the little like ferrules in it and stuff to be able to cut through crust. Yeah,
Right.
Dave's totally right. Our snow's a little dense, so
Yeah. After being in Norway, the cord would do nothing there. And if you use and I have also watched people use cords where they tie like washers onto them and stuff, and I have seen them cut their probes in half. So if you're gonna make sure if you're gonna do that, that you get yourself some tough probes.
Karl, one of the questions we get all the time is like why or how often do we dig is number one, and like why. And I think probably if you were to look at a lot of the Avalanche Center's social media, you would be left to believe that we just spend our entire lives in snow pits. And of course, that's not true. All of us love to ride snowmobiles and ski and everything else too. So we're really only in the pits for but one of the things that we haven't talked about much is how useful, whether it's a hand pit like Nick talked about or a stability test, these things are to track changes over space. So like, it helps me relate one valley, one aspect, one slope to another and changes over time. To Nick's point as well, like these storms come in, they're just crushing us. Avalanche activity goes through the roof. But being able to do these things, it doesn't even have to be day to day. Sometimes over the course of a single day, the amount of change I get from how reactive things are in the morning, very close to the loading event, to just 6, 8 hours later is pretty remarkable. So one of the big tools that I look for all of these tests is to track changes over space and time.
I think a lot of that speaks to, the use of this data and just kind of paying attention a lot to one of the things we always talk about in our like avalanche awareness that we teach is, most of us are not getting out into the snow every single day, unless you're doing it professionally, like many of these folks. But paying attention to what's going on with both the weather and then the snowpack, and if you have resources on your Avalanche Center, your local Avalanche Center page to be able to kind of follow along with things, like you're saying, it's going to allow you to see how things are changing when you do get out there, rather than having, maybe you get out every weekend. It all becomes sort of this brand new thing each weekend that you're having to take in versus kind of tracking it over time. And that's getting away from stability tests a little bit, but just sort of the use of that data as a whole um, to be able to evaluate. Cool. Any other burning questions about stability tests? Anybody love doing them? Anyone, any testimonials from out there in the crowd? What's your favorite? Vote now in the comments.
Did break out the roof block the other day. That was fun. Hadn't done one of those in a while. Can't beat it when you're trying to demonstrate an avalanche.
Those big saws are good for that too.
They make that way easier.
Yeah.
I have a question about stability tests. I mean, just going back to the Norway video. I mean, Karl or anybody, are we aware of the, ECT or ECT adjacent test being any larger than that?
That's about as big a ECT as I've seen. Ned Bear from Mammoth, he tried to do longer ECTs for a while, and I was working on him too. And it's amazing, like even in conditions that are really, really unstable, it's really hard to get the long ones to go. And I think the reason is that they're not really working like an avalanche. In an avalanche, you've got this three-dimensional space that you're working with. And so you collapse a certain part of the slope and everything starts propagating out and away from you. And as it does, like some of that snow that crack might arrest. But there's another crack that's going out this way and another crack that's going out this way. And then everything kind of connects together. Whereas when we use a extended column test, we're just forcing that crack right down that column. So it's almost like one dimension. We're just pushing it down that column. And also an extended column test puts and a propagation saw test, they put a lot of stress on that slab Whereas on a slope, that slab's going to have more support from all the snow around it instead of being isolated. So we'll get arrests, crack arrests. We'll get some longer ones, but like that was very unusual to get one over 10 meters long. And I've dug some really, really long tests and tried to get them up for, to take pictures of. And one time when I was in Switzerland, me and this other Swiss researcher worked on one for like 4 hours because we got some nice results with 2 meter long ones, and then we worked for 4 hours to do one that was 10 meters and it didn't propagate. Which we were joking about the whole time. We're like, it's never going to propagate. Dig, 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 dig. So, yeah.
Well, now we just got to wonder what that 10-meter saw is going to cost.
Oh, yeah. 200 times 10.
I suppose so.
Well, those saws, you can keep on putting the pieces all snap together in such that you can just keep on making it as long as you want, as many different sections as you want to buy, I think.
Excellent. Okay, then. Well, I know. Look, if we're going to challenge the Norwegians and the Swiss here to an Avalanche face-off, we're going to need some longer saws.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that, and I'm sure I'm not unique in this, but one of the things that we talk about a lot in the basic avalanche awareness is, and one of the easiest ways to evaluate whether or not you're in avalanche terrain is slope angle. We can talk about that, the above 30 degrees, under 30 degrees, and just when to look, but how well have you found folks in classes that you're, say, teaching or in talking to people, how well do you think that people are able to measure slope angle effectively in the field with or without tools? And what techniques have you found for teaching people to more effectively utilize slope angle, whether or not that's through measuring it better or just being able to identify it better?
I can kick this off just by saying one of my favorite tools is the slope shade map, especially if I'm going into new areas where I don't know the terrain that well. On like CalTopo, the slope shade layer is one click away, and you can just look for colors. It's as simple as that. And like the orange and the red, I believe is like the 30 to 45-ish, starting to get in that zone. So that'll tell you the slopes that are avalanche terrain, but of course you need to worry about what's below you as well. We have several large avalanche paths on Shasta where people snowshoe and cross-country ski all the time, and the slope beneath your feet might be 10 or 15 degrees, but it's still avalanche terrain. And one of the ways you can tell is if you're in a forested area and all of a sudden you come out into an area that's mostly free of trees or just lacking and missing limbs on the uphill side of trees is a good indicator that perhaps you're in avalanche terrain. If you got a nice clear day, you might be able to see. If it's stormy and a whiteout, you may not be able to see. So it's good to, as always, pay attention to your surroundings. Avalanche Gulch measured, I don't know if you can see behind me. Avalanche Gulch is that big one on the south side there. We had 3 huge slides come down during our last storm cycle before our about a week and a half ago. That measured on seismic seismographs and USGS. The road was closed. It was dumping, and it was really difficult travel in the backcountry, ski, snowmobile, whatever, hard to see, poor viz. So we were getting out, but not super far. And USGS emailed one morning and said they had 3 different seismic events register on their seismographs. And sure as heck, when we were able to get up there, Avalanche Gulch went. Also, another path, what we call the alien footprint, which is to the left here, right above where it says Mount Shasta. also slid, so pretty impressive. Avalanche terrain coming down into low angle terrain below, I guess is my point there. Yeah.
Those are great points, and I'd like to add too. I think the most important thing with slope angles is just to give yourself a wide berth of error. No one's going to be a perfect slope angle reader. In fact, just last week we had a physical therapist in one of our classes whose job all day is to look at the angles of knees and elbows, and they couldn't tell the difference between 25 and 30 degrees. And so no one's going to be perfect, and if you give yourself a wide berth of error, you're just going to set yourself up with success. I don't know what everyone else uses. I typically will give myself like 5 degrees of error.
I think that's a great point, Mac, is like, big wide margins there. And then as far as like the other part of your question, Casey, like how can you learn these things? Honestly, one of my favorite ways, and one of the things that helped me the most as I was kind of developing these skill sets was to ski around my local ski area with a clinometer and measure slope angles. And so then I wasn't trying to actually be like, oh, that slope right there, that's like 37. I'm like, wow, that looks a lot like Ramsey's. And I know Ramsey's is avalanche terrain. So if that looks like Ramsey's, then that's probably avalanche terrain too. And it helped me build correlations between the places I knew really well and knew that they were or were not avalanche terrain. And so kind of doing those two things, and if I'm like, maybe, if you ever say maybe, the answer is probably you should just avoid it.
I think that's such a good point, Allison, just in terms of being able to almost like train your brain to think properly, being able to associate it with something that you do know really well. I think that's a really useful tool, not just in the Avalanche world, but certainly.
And it gives you an excuse to ski around the ski area, even when the skiing's bad, you have something to go do. So like, yeah, every day is not a powder day, right? So now you got something else to go do at the ski resort.
I think one of the general rules of thumb is if you're an advanced skier and you like skiing black runs and you're out in the backcountry and you look at something and you say, that looks like I want to go ski that, chances are pretty good that it's going to be steeper than 30 degrees. In fact, chances are pretty good that it's probably going to be somewhere between 35 and 40 degrees, and it's not going to have very many anchors on it, like thick enough trees that you can't ski through. So it's, for the people that don't always run around with an inclinometer, because I think that one of the most important things you can do in your early days of learning about avalanches is to measure lots and lots and lots and lots of slope angles. And like Max said, you don't want to, you don't, if you're sitting there going, well, I'm not sure if it's 36 or 38 or whatever, like, no. Like, just understand that your measurements aren't going to be perfect, but if you measure a lot of slope angles, you're going to get a little bit of an eye for what's bad and what's not, and what's sort of in the middle. And then, if you find yourself looking at something and you're saying, wow, that just looks like that's a really good powder slope, it's usually avalanche terrain. If you're sort of, an advanced skier and you like skiing in steep terrain.
Gang, I threw up in the chat just my favorite tool to measure slope angle. You can get an app on your phone. There's a bunch of them, but this one is a cool kind of one-stop shop on the screen. It has the slope angle, compass, lat long, and elevation all on one screen. So I'll, like, if I'm digging a pit or doing an observation somewhere, certain place, time, I'll just stand where I'm at. I'll face the direction the slope is facing, and I'll take a screenshot on my phone, and I've got that late for later when I'm processing information and putting things together. So it's one of my favorites.
And I'm just kind of curious, for those that do use them, are people these days are people using more of a like a physical analog device or on the phone? I feel like I probably know the answer.
I just use TikTok. It works. It's great.
Just do a little dance out there, see what happens.
I mean, to be honest, I mean, I do mostly use the phone when I'm in the field, but I have the analog in my pack somewhere, and then in
Mm.
classes, I try to show both ways.
Hmm. Nice.
Yeah, no one can really complain about not having an inclinometer anymore because there's very few people running around the backcountry that don't have a phone. And there are like Nick said, there's all these apps, and even whatever first comes on your iPhone has a thing that you can use for slope angles too. So but it sounds like the one that I'm gonna have to go check out this one that Nick suggests.
It's called Steve's Badass Avalanche Inclinometer. I mean, how can you go wrong?
Go
I,
Steve.
I was just gonna say that I was just gonna read that name as well and say that it's so classic that Nick, the one that Nick likes, is called Steve's Badass Avalanche Inclinometer. That's very consistent with Nick.
Well, it's just good. It's really just good marketing, frankly, and then it brings you in with a quality product.
Yeah, just to underscore the importance of slope angle and terrain, my favorite adage of all time: when the snowpack is in question, terrain is the answer.
That truly is the only thing we have total control over out there. It's where we put ourselves.
Absolutely right. And it is crazy to me too. Like you look at avalanche accident after avalanche accident, and obviously it's not all avalanche accidents are due to terrain, right? But it's amazing how many times you look at avalanche accidents and you think, did they know they were in avalanche terrain? Did they actually, or did they think they were just close enough to not being an avalanche terrain? There was a recent avalanche fatality in Colorado where a person went very carefully under some rocks and then they started skiing down. And they skied down 2 runs, 3 runs, 4 runs, 5 runs. And as they skied down, each run went a little bit further out on the slope. And on the 7th run, they went down, triggered at mid path, went up way above all their tracks, and took out about half of their sets of tracks. And they had just they had a great plan. It looked like anyway. No one was with them, so we don't know what that person was thinking. But it looked like he had a great plan. He had a good up route. He had a good safe route his first few laps, but then he just sort of niggled a little bit further and a little bit further into the avalanche train. And I found myself looking at that, wondering, did he know? Or was he just, did he know and he knew that he was moving into that terrain, or was it just a matter of not really reading that terrain quite correctly? So you just can't underestimate the value of really being able to read avalanche terrain, especially when the danger is high, because then you're absolutely trying to avoid things.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's any motorized users in here, but man, sleds these days, snow machines, whatever you call them, they are badass, just like Steve's inclinometer. And like you can get into the backcountry and into dangerous terrain so fast, and you're chasing your buds, and the dopamine is juicing, and your throttle therapy, whatever, and before you know it, you can get into um into avalanche terrain, what we're talking about here. So um just all things to be mindful of, especially with the snowmobile. You don't need a steep slope to have fun. You can go boondock through the meadows and have just as good a time. And that is one unique advantage of motorized use.
similar to that, and then similar to the story that Karl was saying there too, as you're out there having yourself a good time, like that person probably was enjoying their runs, kind of not letting yourself get lost in the moment as much as we all want to, but continuing to evaluate both your position on the snowpack and anything you see changing on that snowpack as well. We've all been out there when the skiing is just so good. It's just easy to keep pushing it a little bit and just kind of not maybe paying quite as close attention. Your last 3, 4 runs were all perfect. Why would the fifth one not be any different? Um, but just continuing that constant evaluation of terrain and snowpack.
Yeah, constant evaluation. And Karl's mentioned this before. One of the best traits of a partner, of a backcountry partner, is flexibility. Being able to do something else if you see something that makes you or your partner uncomfortable. Putting summit fever aside or powder fever aside and prioritizing coming home in one piece to friends and family and all that good stuff. But yeah, being flexible in the backcountry is crucial to being safe.
Yeah, Theo used to call it nowcasting, right? Because we know what happened last night and we know what we think is going to happen tonight according to the weather, but we are out there at the current time and need to be able to see what's actually happening now and not just rely on what we thought the day was going to be like and what we thought our results were going to be before we got there.
Yeah, totally, Mike. Especially in our snowpack, the avalanche danger is very fleeting. We might get, 2, 3, 4 hours of real touchy conditions, and then things start to settle out. So just being aware of what you're seeing and not ignoring those red flags of Avi danger.
I think that also speaks, a lot of what we've talked about today is our use of these data points, whether or not it's these stability tests, these slope angle things, and then utilizing those on a personal level and going to that idea that Mike was just talking about, how we know what things were in the morning when we left or what we read. We know what we expect them to be, and then we're at that point in the middle there. And I think being able to take all that in and not relying on any one source, particularly one external source. I mean, every Avalanche center, we're all out there doing as good a job as possible. But I mean, I know for us here, we're a couple people or however many are on for the day, and a lot of these Avalanche centers have massive areas to cover. And I got a question actually from a gentleman just the other day, just 2 days ago at an event, who lives maybe 45 minutes west of where our forecast zone kind of ends. And he was asking about sort of the best way to use the data from our forecast for his own purposes out there. And I don't know how often you guys get this question, but if someone doesn't live directly, say, in that forecast zone, what's maybe the best way to utilize the forecast combined with something else for a personal forecast, I guess?
It's a really good question, Casey, and like I guess overall, I don't think my answer to them changes a whole lot versus whether or not somebody is actually living within our forecast area. Like these forecasts are great places to build your trip plan. They're probably pretty good places to start ruling out terrain and closing terrain before you even get into the field. But ultimately, you've got to go out there and you've got to make observations. And when those observations line up with what you anticipated, then that means that forecast is valid. That means that our anticipation of the future, we're right for where you're standing. But when those observations don't line up, that means that forecast isn't valid. And so everything you just planned your day on is in question now. And that may be because you're 40 miles outside of a forecast area. It may be because you're in an anomalous place in the zone that's acting different. It may be because we were wrong. We as forecasters are wrong some days. Our job's trying to tell the futures, and some days we don't get it right. So you make these observations. When they line up, it gives you confidence in your plan. When they don't line up, you need to stop and reevaluate. And that stop and reevaluate really means dialing it back. I honestly don't think I can come up with examples, but most of the time if we open the door to being more aggressive, we'll take it. So really, it's about dialing back my terrain choices if I find observations that don't line up with what I expected. And so I think that still works for them. Now, if you're like, I don't know, in the middle of the White Mountains in central Alaska, they're in a forecast center anywhere near you. You're on your own. But if we have a lot of kind of peripheral areas around us that I think that would work pretty well for. When it lines up, great. When it doesn't, dial it back. And to Karl's point earlier, and I really always do agree with this, you can always go have a fun day and just not go into avalanche terrain. That's totally a legitimate way to enjoy the mountains. There's a lot of that. Actually, I went out with some friends the other day, and it's exactly what we did. We're like, we just don't even bother with this persistent swab thing right now. So let's go out and have a great day and, just not touch avalanche terrain all day.
Yeah, it's good, Dallas. One of the things I like to tell folks if they're recreating in an area that's not in a forecast area, but maybe nearby, couple things you're gonna have similar weather patterns, and you might have similar Abby problems. So just reading the forecast and just kind of taking in the overview of what the forecast is saying is a good start. But find weather stations. There are weather stations all over the place, and Weather Underground, their Wonder Map. There's just crowdsourced weather stations on there. You can find a weather station in somebody's backyard out in the middle of the woods somewhere. Plus, just a lot of the state and government weather stations out there. But find weather stations, and if I'm going into an area I'm unfamiliar with or just don't have a forecast for, there's three things I like to know: how much new snow, what's the wind doing, which way is it blowing from, how strong is it blowing, and what's the temperature? Is it going to be really cold, colder snow, or are we dealing with more wet, heavy snow? So snow, wind, and temp from any weather station you can find is super great information.
Dallas, I really liked how you said just dial it back, and I think if you're starting in an outlier region, you're just dealing with more uncertainty, and you have to build that into your risk equation for the day. And the best way to do that is just to dial it back anytime there's uncertainty.
And I guess I'd just say one other thing about these forecasts is that people should remember that the forecast is an attempt to cover a broad area. And so when you cover a broad area, you use different data than the data you use for a specific slope. So you shouldn't expect that you're going to capture that person can capture that slope scale process. Because, for example, when you're doing avalanche forecasting over a broad area, you look at the winds up high. Okay, so you look at them way above a lot of the terrain. And then you say, well, the winds are generally out of the southwest, so we're generally loading slopes that are northeast. But, there's going to be drainages where the terrain's going to redirect the wind, where things are going to get cross-loaded, where it's not just a northeast facing slope that's getting loaded, but maybe a northwest facing slope and things like that. So you really have to, even when you are in a forecast area, you got to be seeing, just kind of like what Dallas was saying, are things really lining up with what I heard in the forecast for this specific aspect and elevation or not? And if they're not, take a step back. So it's good to take a step back once in a while. And sometimes often.
Alex, you had a couple other questions, topics. I don't know if anything you're thinking of.
Yeah, lately we have been getting a lot of winds, and the wind swaps have been like all over the places, and then soaking with rain and sitting over sugary snow, and now getting buried. So wind swap has always been to me something that I'm scary about, and I always look at something that is one thing that people should avoid if they can really determine what wind swap is. So if you please can add something so people can understand more about how wind swap builds up and what is happening and under the wind swap and why they should be very cautious about it.
Yeah, wind slabs are tricky. I've been duped by wind slabs many times. Shasta is famous for them. Most notably, last year I forecasted low danger, and a snowboarder went out and triggered a big fat wind slab up at about 11,000 feet on the mountain, and tucked the tail in between my legs and went back to the drawing board. So I don't have any answers. Curious to hear what other folks think. They're tricky as heck.
I agree with you on that, Nick. I actually think people downplay wind swabs. I had a really great conversation with Sarah Carpenter, who many of you may know. Sarah was one of the owners of the American Avalanche Institute. Really great educator. And Sarah, actually, we brought her in to do a talk about wind swabs because, Alex, to your point, like I think people we see them on the forecast all the time. We see wind affected snow in the mountains frequently. And so we get very comfortable. We get almost like desensitized to the idea of wind swabs and wind affected snow. And, really, when it comes, especially with professionals, most professionals I know, their near misses have been wind swabs, not persistent swabs. And I think it's because we're so used to these things. And maybe you could argue that it's just that they're there more often. I don't know. But it's a really, really tricky one. And to Karl's point, we have this sort of elementary idea of like a west wind loads an east aspect. And that sounds really, really good. And if you draw it up on paper, it works really, really well. But I actually grabbed a photo from earlier. I'm going to throw up real quick if I can. Patty Morrison, who's one of our local longtime avalanche forecasters, did just such a cool practitioner study where she wanted to highlight why winds don't really quite behave like we think at that elementary level. But basically, so this is Stevens Pass ski area. This is like in the middle of the Cascades up here in Washington. And that double red line is actually interstate Highway 2. And so what Patty did is she handed like little cheap compass to all of her ski patrollers. And she would get on the radio and she would tell them to take their location and a reading. And so the blue arrow is the upper air wind. So what Karl is talking about is like, we as avalanche forecasters, we're like, okay, the upper air winds unaffected by terrain are out of the west. So that's that blue arrow. The big red arrows are actually the weather stations there at Stevens Pass. And so, these weather stations are showing more like, oh, these are more like southwest winds right there on the left side of the screen. And all the little arrows are the ski patrollers over the course of several days. And you can see winds pointing in every single direction. And so when it comes to wind swabs, they're really tricky because they can be in a lot of locations that you may not always be anticipating them. But one of the things that I do like about wind swabs is when we think about how do we identify them, most of it is visual. And so it's like, do I see wind drifts? Do I see cornices? Do I see textured snow surfaces? Do I see that big pillow-like slab? We don't spend quite as much time hammering on those things. I mean, not that we can't do stability tests on them, but oftentimes that's not my go-to for things like wind swabs. I'm more likely to just purely avoid the wind-loaded slope because some wind swabs are thin on one end, thick in the middle, and thin on the other. And so where you did your test can have a lot of impact on how the kind of results you would get. And ultimately, most of the time these are localized slopes, and I can just find ways to go around either on lower angle terrain or on non-wind affected snow. And so anyway, I thought Patty's this is a classic research piece that's been around for a really long time, and Patty is definitely one of my local heroes here that I always look up to. So it's great to get to show her work off still.
I think that's a really interesting point you make, Dallas. I know, you know, I think you kind of mentioned this, like when we're teaching the concept of wind loading to people, it is very easy to say like the wind blows from this way, it loads this way. But it really just, I mean, that's like, a barn in a field where there's nothing else, then yeah, that probably holds true. But when you're in an area like complicated terrain like the mountains, I mean, that wind is going to be bouncing off things, swirling, coming up gullies, just it's doing a lot of things. And that's a really good reminder of that.
I'll see if I can find that paper real quick and drop it in because it's just a fun read. Patty is she's a wonderful teacher, and so the paper is really digestible.
I think it's another piece of the puzzle is wind speed. We'll get light to moderate wind, and that'll load right below ridge lines, or we'll get cranking winds and it'll load farther down on slopes. So just so much variability with wind loading. And I guess those visual observations are really crucial to really kind of determining where slabs might lurk. And it can be super tricky because a lot of times they're hard and you're on top and you're like, oh, Bill's bomber. And then all of a sudden it just pops and you're off for a ride on the the sheet of glass getting ripped out from beneath you.
Nick, I was going to ask you, you said you had that experience with the, you called it low and then the snowboarder triggered that big avalanche. Like, as you looked back at that situation, what do you learn from that, or what do you sort of take away from that?
Never underestimate the northwest wind after a storm on Mount Shasta. Like every time, we get a storm that passes, usually the northwesterlies will kick in to some extent. And we, just never underestimate a wind event. Really was kind of the take home. And so now I'm quite gun shy. We'll get winds that'll just scour the whole mountain and sublimate the snow, and you won't find a single wind slab up there. And then in seemingly similar conditions, you'll go up there on another day and find some slabs, and can be a little touchy. And so just back to the point of being duped and it being tricky, and there's just a lot of variability. And again, wind speed, wind direction, all the little funky orographics like Dallas showed in that really great visual. And then the snow properties, dry snow, wet snow. Is it sticking together? Is it not sticking together? Is it tumbling down? We get a lot of times where the wind will blow snow and it'll just, it'll be blowing like crazy up there. And you'll think, oh, for sure, considerable danger, high danger, whatever. It's going to be dicey. And there's not a single slab, on any avalanche prone slope, but all the snow is blown down into just lower angle depressions and gullies and stuff. And I think a lot of that has to do with just kind of the snow properties. To this day, I still struggle sometimes with accurately forecasting wind slabs.
I'm gonna share a quick photo just since we're talking about wind doing weird stuff on Tuesday. I think I'll see if this will work. Can folks see that?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. So I was just out doing an observation, and in the distance you can see like the North Pole on Red Lake Peak here in Tahoe. It's awesome skiing just below 10,000 feet, high nines. And you might be able to see like, steep, consequential avalanche terrain, high quality skiing when snow allows up there. And then there's all this blowing snow down low close to the camera at like 8,000 feet. I don't know, in the front of that photo. just the wind was doing really interesting, anomalous stuff where, this is why I took the photo. Like up high, there wasn't that stuff happening, but there'd be these swirling wind gusts all around me, thousands of feet lower and kind of near tree line terrain. So yeah, wind it's something I totally agree with, like many of the comments made. I mean, it's something we interact with all the time. I'm certainly guilty of being maybe overly comfortable or maybe overly confident with it from time to time, but it's good to acknowledge that, even the most simplest natural phenomenon is pretty complex.
Yeah, that's interesting, David. We've noted that a couple times this year as well. The higher speed wind down low and kind of calm to light to moderate up high. More than a few times this year, we've been chatting about that. And just on that note, I think one of the things about it when you're out there too, the texture, I think, as much as we like to read the texture of snow, sometimes reading the texture of a wind slab is tough. If the smooth is good here and the ripples aren't as good, and that's not always necessarily the case. It's very dynamic, I think, from place to place in the mountains. And sometimes I think that I have a good idea of reading the texture of the snow, and it doesn't necessarily prove to last throughout the day. So,
David, I'm curious, was that like a east wind? Was it like an offshore? So
Yeah,
that's a classic setup for us. Is low level gradients driving really strong winds at low elevations while the ridge lines are like dead calm. It's crazy.
yeah, half an hour or something after that photo, I was digging a pit in a similar location, and I kept getting these gusts, like covering my face in snow. And it wasn't a particularly windy day, but I wasn't on the top of the ridge or anything. But like I chose the spot where the wind was bedeviling me.
Here's a question for the group. Duration of a wind event. What's considered like, what are some thresholds? 4 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours. We were discussing this with the guys the other day. There's some guidelines for wind speed and its effectiveness on blowing snow, but we were talking about like how long does it have to blow for significant wind loading?
Depends on how much snow you got, what the condition of the snow is in your fetch, and how hard the wind's blowing, I mean, you can sometimes form really sensitive wind slabs in half an hour, 15 minutes. Things are really going off, And then sometimes it'll blow and blow and blow, and it's just not quite blowing hard enough, or, at least that's been I probably don't deal with quite the wind slabs you guys deal with because, you start out with snow that's quite a bit denser to go, so you probably need a higher wind speed just to get stuff moving on a lot of days.
To your question, Nick, we got surprised by a wind event yesterday. Less than 2 hours, and we started having natural activity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it fully caught us flat-footed. I think it's because to Carl's point, like right now the snow's way colder and way drier than it normally is for us, with single digit and below zero temperatures in the mountains, and those wind swaps built real fast and began to natural. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like just so much variability in wind loading. A lot of parts to the or pieces to the equation, and yeah, kind of like that sticker on the mirror in the Forest Service bathroom that says you are responsible for your own safety. Like, we put these things out on on the forecast that give you a broad brushstroke of what things might look like out there, but it could be different.
And just going to speaking to the, we were talking earlier about the utilization of the forecast in making your own travel plans and stuff, but then it just kind of speaks to the difficulty of putting out that forecast for not only a broad area, but like a 24-hour period. Talking about seeing wind slabs form in 15 minutes, half an hour. It's like you can imagine what pops up over that 24-hour period. So just consistently taking in that data and just still you making your own decisions based on the data at hand and your own observations and how important that becomes as well. An interesting link there in the chat from Nick about just from the weather.gov there about trying to take a look at the wind, more info there on wind. We have any burning questions from the chat here before we move to perhaps wrap things up for the evening?
We are so thankful. And we are so thankful to all of you. And it's amazing conversation. And I believe not just people who join us tonight are learning, but for us recording, and we'll be spreading this to many. It's our dog is here. We are very, very thankful. Very thankful. Very thankful.
And we all wouldn't be here without you guys and all the work that you've done over the years. And I did throw a link in there into the chat if you do feel like helping the Dodov Foundation, the Nickolay Dodov Foundation, continue their excellent work. It's got to make the ask.
We are all doing this together. We cannot do anything. We are beyond thankful.
Thank you for the help and the support. I mean, all these around table events, they're so helpful to me, and I believe to everybody else who are joining us. It's always something that you can learn a little bit and add to your toolbox and skills, and to travel safe. Winter, I guess it's turning up right now, and we're looking forward to some good skiing and good adventures and to be safe. I guess the most important thing is to come back home and tell the story about the good day you have been having, and to show off a little bit with some snapshots. In our area, it's interesting. The backcountry is beautiful, pure people, good places to go to. We're happy when we see people to share time with. Some people come to town and they don't like to ski the resort anymore, so they join us. We're backcountry skiers. We don't
5 years. This is 5th year in a row. We haven't tried single lift chair. Thank you to Alex, because he breaks all the trails. All the kids, they know him. So we just go to the backcountry every day. We don't ski every day because it's not skiable every day.
But we ski up the hill, and some days we ski down the hill.
We are there for anything that the mountain offers us. And we are very thankful for these conversations. And we have so many friends in Bulgaria. Casey met many of them with our discussions. And because now they cannot join us, they already asked me not to forget recording. So we'll send all these conversations, and very thankful. And we really hope one day to be with all of you in person, in somewhere in room for event and for skiing together and for sharing good food and chocolates and hugs. And this is what we love to do, being in the mountain, in the backcountry, and we love to share. And we have been to many kids this winter. It's maybe the first winter after we start Zoom.
Yeah.
We have been to hundreds of kids in the last 2 months. And it's amazing experience. And to get them interested and to see how they know kids are very smart. They know it's something they have to think about and to earn all their life. We bribe them for good cause. We give a lot of chocolate and gifts, and but we believe it's when you share your love with passion, we hope they follow. And we are thankful to all of you and to all our Avalanche educators. And
Well, we're thankful to you guys too, Alex and Natalia. We're very thankful for the energy, the time, the money, everything that you put in to try to spread the Avalanche knowledge to the youth. I mean, it's unbelievable how much the two of you have accomplished in all these years. And it's been amazing to be just a tiny little part of that and watch what y'all have achieved. So thanks for all you do. I think there's a lot of people that appreciate, all those parents sure appreciate the fact that you're coming and talking to their kids.
thank you, Karl.
and
Thank you so
the
much.
good thing is that they also get educated, and one day will take a course and maybe two, and once they get to the backcountry, definitely they'll be hooked for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
Very thankful. I believe there is no other way for us. We don't ask questions, but it's really good thing.
He has been helping us too.
Yeah.
You know,
a
it's
lot.
kind of an energy exchange. The way we hug the trees, we like to hug all the kids we go to and share time with them.
And they give us so much, both ways, for sure, like with you. And thankful.
Yeah.
Thank you. We really hope and believe we'll be in the same room soon. Hopefully with Nick and Casey, maybe in 2 days.
That's good.
Fingers crossed for it.
Okay.
We want the snow, but not so much that you can't get here. We're gonna thread that needle.
Mike, how did you know Nick?
No, I did not know Nick. I do live in the North Lake Tahoe zone.
Nice.
I saw the link online today, and I'm a big fan of a lot of you guys, but I know Karl from a long time ago, working together. I worked for Theo Miners for a long time at Alaska Rendezvous, and Karl used to come up and spend a little time with us early season and kind of dig around with us and tell us if we knew what we were talking about or not. Or if we needed to rethink ourselves.
I kind of remember it differently. I remember there are some people that knew a lot that were trying to keep me from killing myself.
Yeah, we sure had a lot of fun.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really appreciate y'all putting this together. And I just got home from work and kind of tuned in, I'm sure pretty late, but thanks for letting me join.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Mike.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
And thanks to everybody for joining tonight and joining us and participating in the chat and throwing those questions out there. And
thanks for being a good master of ceremonies there, Casey.
my pleasure.
Okay,
Phenomenal job again.
Oh,
Always. Casey's, no one is like Casey. We are so thankful.
I don't know if you know that we have this video about the tobacco smoking, anti-tobacco smoking. So we start our presentation with Casey. He talks about how bad it is for your health
Yeah.
and how people should, how kids should avoid it. And then we go to the presentation with the avalanche safety. So they,
Casey's always with us. We started with you. And we believe it's a good message. We like healthy lifestyle. And we
Absolutely.
didn't even realize in the beginning how much they really.
no vaping, no tobacco.
Yeah.
So we try to encourage kids to be healthy and go to play in the mountains. And Casey, it's really doing this very well.
Hey, whatever makes you ski more in the mountains, right? Whatever makes it more
Absolutely.
fun out there.
Yeah.
Thank you to all of you, everyone.
Does anybody
Right
have
on.
topics for next year? Sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, no, go ahead, Nick.
We're always looking for topics. This is a really fun event, and I don't know if anybody at the table has any ideas or topics that would be good for next year.
Yes, we like this.
I just wanted to say that tomorrow we'll be skinning up the hill. We'll be talking about you guys.
Oh, we have our hearts full. We'll talk about this not just tomorrow. We live with this and keeps us going.
be right there with you, just a couple 100 miles away, but
Yes.
on the same track.
Oh,
It's interesting because when you guys were talking about getting data, we have two Avalanche centers not very far apart from each other. We have the Sierra, and then we have the little southeast of us, not the Eastern Sierra. This is the
Bridgeport.
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 Yeah. So because we're kind of on the side,
Yeah, they
on the west
knows
side,
we
we
are,
have sometimes we have a little different snowpack than in Tahoe, and
yeah.
sometimes we get a lot of snow. You guys don't get it, but then you get a lot of wind after this, and then it gets warmer than where you're at. And it's a little different. So getting data from both sides is really helpful. And then again, once you go up there, some days it's totally different.
We have been trying to get some of our
Especially last year, the snow was totally different. Like a lot of days, the Tahoe was calling for considerable. Our site was like moderate to low.
We have been trying to get some of the Forest Service rangers. They go on snowmobiles to Abbott's Pass to take professional classes and maybe do professional observations here. So we still keep trying.
I think some of the snowmobilers from Sierra Avalanche Center, they go to Abbott's Pass and they take some data. And sometimes they pause, but especially around Bear Valley, nobody does it. I think the Central Sierra mountain guides, ski guys, they should do it. Anyway, they take clients, and once in a while they should share some information.
It would be kind of a cool thing for them to, just for the guide services in general, to kind of show their ski clients how to submit an observation, just because that's getting the word out there. And I know I can only speak for our Avalanche Center, but I'm sure all the Avalanche Centers out there probably love getting observations from the public. Goes a long way. Alrighty, well,
All right.
I know I gotta get out of here and get myself some dinner to get ready for tomorrow, but
Yes.
I just want to say thanks to everybody, Natalia and Alex. Oh,
For all of you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we believe one day we'll be together, and after we finish, Alex will cook for all of you. I really believe
Love
this
it.
will happen. Yes. Thank you, thank you.
Thanks,
All
guys.
right. Thank you all.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, all. It's good
Bye.
to see you.
Thanks, Alex and Natalia.
Thank
All right, thank
so
you.
much. We love you guys. Thank you.
Have a nice
Thank
rest
you,
of the
thank you.
season. We wish you a lot of snow and safe skiing
Safe skiing.
Absolutely.
and climbing, anything. snowmobiling.
Just hiking. We love you guys. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Good night, all.
We'll keep going.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night. Good
Bye,
night.
guys. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Karl.
guys.
Thank you, Karl. Bye. Good night.
Good night, guys.
Oh, Casey.
I'll
Casey,
see
I
you
don't know how
soon.
to say thank
Yes.
See
Oh,
you soon. We call you tomorrow evening.
We'll let
and
you
Yes.
tomorrow.
Let me know. Let me know.
Yes.
And I'll
Yes.
fingers crossed that I'm gonna get to see you. Alex,
Yes.
don't you worry, I got that ping pong paddle ready to go. It actually lives at the bar where I play. So
I will bring some more too. You can try different rubber.
okay. It takes me months to get used to one new one. You can't be
Yeah.
throwing new
No,
paddles at
it's
me.
for
I'm never
everybody.
gonna
Like once you